A warm welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubadi. The G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, has been very occupied with the developments in Ukraine, especially after Russia launched airstrikes targeting several cities in the country on Tuesday. Leaders slammed Russia and stood by Ukraine and Poland, where 2 people were said to have been killed at the border as a result of the strikes.
Amid discussions ongoing at the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, the war in Ukraine has taken center stage. Leaders wasted no time in slamming Russia for launching airstrikes on Ukraine on Tuesday and pledged support for Poland, where 2 people lost their lives at the border with Ukraine as a result of the airstrikes. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak accused the Russian president of launching the attacks on innocent civilians in Ukraine.
While other world leaders were working together to tackle the greatest challenges our people face, Putin was launching indiscriminate attacks on civilians in Ukraine. In the wake of these attacks, today we held an urgent meeting of allies to underscore our solidarity with Ukraine and Poland.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expressed his condolences to the victims of the attacks. He also announced during a press conference that Canada will be supporting investigation into the blast before pledging a further 500 million Canadian dollars for military assistance to Ukraine.
Canada and our allies are unified behind Ukraine. This week we announced that Canada will provide $500 million in additional military assistance for Ukraine, which builds on the $500 million from Budget 2022. In addition, we're extending the Canadian Armed Forces training mission of recruits of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the UK for another year until the end of December 2023.
U.S. President Joe Biden said the U.S. and NATO allies are investigating the blast, but that early information suggests it may not have been caused by a missile fired from Russia.
As you saw, I just met with the leaders of NATO and the G7 and talked about the latest events in Europe. And I briefed them on my discussions with President Duda of Poland, as well as NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg. And we agreed to support Poland's investigation into the explosion in rural Poland near the Ukrainian border. And I'm going to make sure we figure out exactly what happened.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has reaffirmed the bloc's support for Ukraine.
We also discussed the explosion in Poland near the border. We offer our full support to Poland and assistance with the ongoing investigation. We will remain in close contact with our partners on the next steps. We will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes, and we stand united.
The Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, said he agreed with the planned investigation, as did the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. Turkish President Recep Erdogan said he respected Russia's statement that it did not hit Polish territory. He also agreed that there should be an investigation. Other bilaterals took place on the side of the summit between Australia and France, Britain and Australia, Britain and India, and between Britain and the United States. At the end of the summit this morning, host President Joko Widodo said the war in Ukraine was the most debated topic among leaders gathered at the G20.
I call on all parties to remain calm and refrain from escalating tension. I always state that war will only bring devastation. Therefore, we must stop the war.
G20 leaders had made a declaration at the end of the 2-day summit saying they deplore in strongest terms Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Russia, on the other hand, says the politicization of the summit was unfair.
Well, Well, staying with the G20, head of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, says several major economies face real risk of sliding into recession as a fallout of the war in Ukraine. Last month, the WTO projected global trade to rise just 1.0% in 2023, down sharply from an estimated 3.5% rise for the year.
We risk, yes, it may not happen everywhere. But I think that in several key countries, we risk, yes, sliding into a recession. And of course, the impact of that can be quite significant, even for emerging markets and poor countries. The fact of what is happening around the war in Ukraine, uncertainty about what will happen with that, when that will end, issues to do with what happens to food prices, energy prices, inflation, the inflationary pressures. There's so many uncertainties, and most of the risks are on the downside.
I want to bring in Ambassador Joe Keshi to the program. He's been monitoring the situation, of course, in the G20 summit in Indonesia. Ambassador Keshi, thank you for joining us on the program. And I want to ask, leaders are focused mainly on issues surrounding the Russian-Ukraine invasion. And even the joint statement was a condemnation of Russia's presence in the country. While the war in Ukraine, of course, is still front burner for many countries, especially in Europe, did they perhaps sweep other more pressing issues of global concern under the carpet while just focusing only on the war going on in Ukraine?
Well, nations act on what they consider to be their best interest. And for many of these G20 members, the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion, it's a very serious issue for them. Look at the complete global disruption of the global economy, for example. And you could see that in the run-up, again, an example, in the run-up to the midterm election in the United States, the Democrats, for example, were panicking that the economic situation as a result of the war itself, could affect the outcome of the election. So you can understand why they spent such a long time on the war in Ukraine. Look, it's also a global issue because the economic side of it is not only affecting the G20 countries, it's affecting almost all countries in the world. I was at a meeting yesterday where we said to ourselves, we never knew the importance of Ukraine to our economy. And that's the honest truth. So now we know. And this is why they are probably spending such long hours discussing the situation in Ukraine. But I can assure you that they did not overlook other global issues, because they are equally as pressing as the war in Ukraine as well. The global economy, it's one that I'm sure that they devoted a lot of time to.
Yeah, that wasn't reflected, though, the joint statement. But then there were also the strikes on Tuesday, and you notice that the leaders put the brakes on blaming Russia. Just stopping short of blaming Russia, they said they needed to investigate, and that seemed to be, the theme for, the response to the airstrikes that Russia sent in to Ukraine yesterday, almost 100 of them. What did you think about that?
I think the response so far has been very measured. I think it's been, rational and responsible. And the action they've taken is to make sure that they don't make a mistake by jumping to conclusions. So what they are trying to do is to find out, to investigate. And when they say preliminary investigation shows A, it indicates that they are not very clear as to where the rocket came from. And until they are very sure of where the rocket was fired from. It could have been from Ukraine itself, trying to stop the Russian airstrikes, and it got strayed into Polish territory. So, for me, it's been what you expect of leaders: to be calm, to be measured, to be responsible until they have all the details, until they have the full information as to where the rockets were fired from. Now, if they get information that it was actually fired from Russia, I can also assure you, because they do not want to be drawn into the conflict and expand, the conflict itself. There are measures, and their response will still be, be very responsible.
What can you say was the takeaway from this year's G20?
Well, the question always is, what was the takeaway from last year's? These leaders meet, they discuss their interests. These are 20 leading economies in the world. And, they meet, they discuss, and then they tell the rest of us in the world what they've discussed. In fact, they decide our fate in some cases. But I think if there's any takeaway, it's by the individual countries. For example, the United States and the Chinese, the Indians and the British Prime Minister. There were so many sideline meetings, which actually turned out to be more significant than the meeting itself. Because when you look at the American, Chinese, the Indian, the British, the Canadian, and the rest, it was more of the takeaways are for individual countries, because for the rest of the world, they dealt more, at least from what we can see, they dealt more with an issue that concerned them, the global security and the impact of that global security vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine on the global economy, which is essentially, their primary interest. So for me, the takeaway, it's more like to individual countries rather than the global situation itself. There are still a lot of global issues to be tackled, but their focus was on the war in Russia for the Americans. Good opportunity to, break the ice between the Americans and the Chinese. The takeaways for individual countries and not for the global world.
And we'll leave it at that. Thank you again, Ambassador Keshi, for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me, as always. Thanks.
The Polish president says there's no sign that the missile that hit Polish territory was part of an intentional attack on Poland. According to President Andrzej Duda, it's very likely that a missile explosion was caused by Ukrainian air defenses. 2 people were killed after a missile landed in eastern Poland near the Ukrainian border, and this happening just days after the Russian troops withdrew from the city of Kherson. We'll be discussing this in just a moment as we try to reach the VOA's Anna Chernikova, who did escape being shelled during the attacks yesterday. Anna, well, great to see you, and thanks for joining us. We almost thought you wouldn't, but we're glad that you're okay. The last time we spoke, you were just outside a bunker, and I think just by the road, there were power outages across Kyiv and in many parts of Ukraine. There was, of course, a lot of damages. And this morning, authorities have been able to, see the extent of the damages caused in Ukraine by those airstrikes. But everyone is talking about the attack on the Polish border and the 2 people killed. Does that, in a way, take away from, the magnanimity of what has happened in Ukraine and what's been going on with the Russian assault on the country?
Good evening. Yes, well, today we have a day after. So a day after, we have more details and more information of what had happened yesterday. And of course, Ukraine is still suffering. Electricity outages still continue. However, situation is under control. And of course, as you correctly mentioned, the territory of Poland was also affected by yesterday's attacks. This is a very, very serious situation that happened. For the moment, what we hear from international leaders and from Mr. Stoltenberg, what he said in his latest speech, that apparently, according to preliminary investigation and preliminary information that is available, it might be that the missile, the debris of the missiles that hit the territory of Poland was a Ukrainian air defense missile. However, again, this is just what we know from the comments, preliminary comments. Investigation is still ongoing, and according to Ukrainian officials, Ukrainian side is providing all necessary data for Polish representatives and in order to help them to investigate this case. And doesn't matter really which debris exactly was there. Either it was Russian missiles that was attacking or Ukrainian missiles that was defending its territory from Russian missile attack. Russia is to take, and a lot of international leaders said, including Mr. Scholz of Germany and the Prime Minister of Italy and more others, Russia is to take responsibility as Russia is attacking. So for the moment, of course, Ukraine pays its condolences to the victims, to Polish victims, and to the Polish nation. And unfortunately, this accident shows that not only Ukraine is under very high risk of being shelled and experience shelling, the results of the shelling, but also neighboring countries. And considering that these neighboring countries are NATO countries, a lot of them, it's an important question to be raised, how these countries could be protected. Ukrainian authorities, representatives of the Ukrainian President Office, for instance, mentioned that Ukraine is still needing help for air defense. And of course, Ukraine is hoping that its partners could help to protect Ukrainian sky, because as this accident shows, the defense of Ukrainian sky is now not only necessary for Ukraine, but also for neighboring countries who can, unfortunately, suffer Russian attacks and be under Russian attacks. Not
right.
directly, but still suffering.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, Poland, of course, is a NATO country. You notice the leaders trying to make this fine dance between not really mentioning Russia behind the attacks, saying that Poland wasn't intentionally hit. And that's because it, of course, triggers the article that allows NATO to defend Poland and other NATO territories. But then Canada also promised around 500 million Canadian dollars yesterday at the G20 summit for Ukraine. So there's more aid coming. But on the ground, people are angry. And I've seen some of the reports, about people just reacting to yesterday's strikes. A lot of them are angry at Russia. They're also angry, I think, at probably NATO nations and allied nations, beg your pardon, that this war has gone on for too long.
My feeling here, being here on the field, that Ukrainians, of course, wish for more, serious support, such as, for instance, aircrafts or more air defense systems that partners can provide. But again, Ukrainians still understand, and this understanding is coming through all these months. And also Ukrainian government is trying to explain to people that international partners are doing really a lot. But still, Ukrainian government also is asking for more. And it's also understandable because, as I already mentioned, unfortunately, not only Ukraine is under this high risk of being, of having victims and being attacked, being resulted in the attacks, but also neighboring countries. And this is probably why Ukrainian side has even more right now after this accident to ask for this more help. I don't think that, I don't really have a feeling here in Ukraine that people are angry at NATO partners or international partners. People are very thankful because people understand that if there is no support that we have, that the country has already received, it would have been possible for Ukraine to defend as it is defending at the moment. And it's the 9th month of war is going on, while on the 24th of February, a lot of experts were saying that only 3 days would take for Russia to actually capture Ukraine. So, of course, people want more. Of course, this is understandable because people are dying every day, not only soldiers, but also civilians. And unfortunately, yesterday, we know about at least one victim. And this victim was just staying at her own apartment in the central part of the city of Kyiv. So people will want more, of course, and will hope for more. And this similarly, as the government will ask for more. But I don't really think it is anger. It's not going to be correct to say. It's just hope for more. But people really thankful because they understand that otherwise Ukraine would have been able to defend as great as it is doing as of now. Because of course, people who are defending, they are Ukrainians, and they are really showing a great, extremely great, I guess, military expertise and defense of their country. But definitely equipment that Ukrainian soldiers have is a huge support from the international partners. And this is definitely what Ukrainians is very thankful for.
Anna, thanks again for the explanation and of course, for the courage the Ukrainians have expressed throughout this war. We do hope you continue to stay safe and reach out to us as developments unfold.
Thank you.